I grew up in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, which is a smallish town north of Philadelphia. Wow, when I was growing up, I didn't come from a musical family, and so really what I was listening to was whatever was on the radio. I love punk rock, I love indie rock, I loved electronic music, I loved Radiohead, Bjork. I think that if I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, and I think that it's inevitable to just encounter so many different kinds of music if you're paying attention. And this was all, I didn't put this in a hierarchy for me. I just absorbed it all. And I think that it all kind of worked its way into my work in some way. But at a young age, when I was 7, I started playing piano and just fell in love with classical music. So any sort of little bits of classical music I could get, I just really attached myself to. And these were usually, at that point, like the greatest hits. These were not obscure modern pieces. These were like Beethoven symphonies and Mozart symphonies. I started writing music really young, when I was about 10. I started writing pieces for myself to play on piano. But it was funny, I think I decided to become a composer before I even started writing music. There was just something about it that really worked for me. It allowed me to be creative in all these different kinds of ways. It allowed me to access all these different kinds of worlds, theater, poetry, philosophy, visual art, like all that is present in music, in contemporary music. I always studied composition in college, and so that was my first taste of working with players one-on-one, writing music for particular people, and then that continued in a million different ways up until now. When I moved to New York 13 years ago, I started a group called Victoire, and we traveled around the world performing my music, and then since then, I've had the opportunity to work with so many amazing professional ensembles, not the least of which is the Kronos Quartet, which I started working with when I was 27. So they really took a chance on me when I was relatively young. And orchestras, opera companies since then. So everything has just sort of escalated every year. I'm very grateful. I don't really know how I ended up here. Like I said before, I didn't come from a musical family. But I knew from a very young age that self-expression was going to be the driving force of my life over, status or money or anything else. It had to be self-expression. It had to be something creative. And I was always, as a kid, drawing, painting, writing poems, just creating all the time. And it was something I needed to do to sort of organize my mind. So I think maybe that's it, that composing is a way for me, of organizing the world. And you take all the data of the world and you make something that is very organized. Music has a piece of music has a beginning and an end, and it's divided into all these little parts, literally, like with lines. And it's like a way of making sense of the world, making sense of time, making sense of really complicated abstract ideas. You're putting it into a very concrete format. And maybe that sounds sort of dry, but to me it was the opposite. It was a way of just understanding the world and a way of relating to the world. I still feel that. I remember being able to articulate that as a teenager, and I'm still on the same exact path, at 39. I feel like I don't remember the first time I ever heard a quartet. I just feel like they've always been there, like in the back of my mind. I do remember the first time I heard the Kronos Quartet, which is their album Pieces of Africa. And I remember playing it for my dad for some reason. And he was sort of like, what is this? What is this? And I'm like, I don't know, but I think it's great. And I was trying to, found myself defending it, not to him, and sort of like trying to, I was like, these are my people. Like, I don't know who these people are, but I feel like they're my people. So that was really powerful. You know, I've always been really dedicated to education and to, beyond just education, to demystifying music for people. I don't think music has to be difficult or mysterious or elevated necessarily. I think everyone has the exact same access to music, and everyone is entitled to have a very strong opinion and feelings about music. Regardless of background or education or where your family is from. So I think the 50 for the Future project is just an amazing endeavor, and it's just making this music accessible without dumbing down the music itself. It was the opportunity to write a piece for an educational opportunity, but a place where I didn't feel like I had to make the music easy. It wasn't like write an easy piece for kids. This was a project that was beyond that. It was a chance to demystify the musical process and to let people into the process, to let young people into the process, to let emerging string quartets into my world, which I think is fantastic. So, and I think my music itself, is a bunch of different things. It's there's really virtuosic passages that are very difficult. There's very simple things. And these things all combine and find a place in that world. And so I think that maybe that's appealing for this project as well. I love writing for string quartet because the strings can do so many different things. And I really think of each member of a quartet in particular as a personality. And there's this very dramatic sense to all my string quartets, and that the individual instruments are sort of like people, they're characters, and they can at times be working with each other to create a single chord or a single texture, or they can sort of be at odds with each other and creating really complicated counterpoint. And you can seamlessly switch between the two. And so that there's just such versatility and so many options in terms of like a colorful palette. That I feel like I can let my imagination go crazy. So the piece, my most recent piece for Kronos, Enthusiasm Strategies for this project, begins with this very delicate sort of constellation of natural harmonics. And so it sounds sort of like, I don't know what it sounds like. It sounds like just a sound that I wanted to hear, this very high sort of tinkling quality that then sort of dissipates into something more earthy. And again, the group can go from one tone to another just on a dime. So the title, Enthusiasm Strategies, is meant to be sort of funny. It's just, it came to me one day, I was thinking of the way that I think about music, and in my darkest moments, music is an enthusiasm strategy. The writing of music is a way of like bringing me back to the world, of calming me down, and listening to music and going to see live music and interacting with musicians is the same thing for me. It's a way of generating or kind of retrieving my enthusiasm for the world. And so I also wanted to write a piece that was fun and challenging, and that allowed particularly young quartets or quartets that are just starting out the opportunity to make some strange sounds and to do some strange things. So like I said before, the beginning is this sort of constellation of natural harmonics, so like very high sounds, even from the cello. And then it moves on to a sort of chord progression that switches from like the very extremes of the register to very close spacing. So it's sort of like this accordion of like, very wide to very small. And then the end is, again, a repeated chord progression that fades to nothing. And in fact, the last couple measures of the piece are just the quartet miming a texture. So it's really something that's for the live performance, where they're supposed to pretend to play. It fades out to nothing, but they're still sort of moving. So I just wanted the opportunity, in a 5-minute piece, for these young quartets to be able to do some things they'd never done before, and to be challenged, but also to have an idea of where they are in the piece. Yeah, but again, I want to emphasize the fun part of it, because this is for people who know my operas and my orchestral music. Like, there's a sort of darkness to it, which I fully embrace and own up to. But this piece is fun, so I'm really happy to have an opportunity to write something that is short and happy and fun. When I'm generating ideas for a piece, it's almost something more that I feel than I think about. When I hit upon an idea that I feel is flexible and deep enough to sustain 5, 10, 60 minutes of music, I really like feel it in my bones. I'm like, yes, that is good. And it's almost like it reaches my body before it reaches my mind. This is sounding very new agey, but it is this feeling of like, yes, that's it. But to get to that moment, I mean, those are the best moments of composing, is when you've hit upon something that you feel can sustain a piece, an idea that you can go to your desk and work on every day for hours and hours. But to get to that point, there's usually like days or weeks of just like pulling my hair out, and trying to come up with again, something that is strong enough to sustain my interest, to sustain the audience's interest, to sustain the player's interest over an extended period of time. I hope with this piece to be part of the process of welcoming younger players and listeners into the world of contemporary music. Again, the format of 50 for the Future is there's so many entry points that are so easy. These pieces are relatively short. There's an amazing website that you can see the score online. Like, there's no part of it that is mysterious or difficult to figure out. And so I think that and I tried to do that with the music too, to create something that was both familiar and strange, that let people draw on their skills as players, but also led them into new territory. So I think that, I hope that in the end it brings players and quartets into the world of contemporary music and encourages them to seek out their own composers and collaborations in the same way that Kronos has done for so long. I wish I had time to have hobbies. This is like the constant joke amongst me and my composer friends. It's like, oh, one day, maybe like when we're in our 80s, we'll have like a hobby, because composing is so all-consuming, and just to sort of, survive and have the time and space to generate, to have a creative practice is like more than a full-time job. But I will say, there's a lot of stuff that composing has led me to. In that, I'm still performing as a pianist. I'm writing a lot more opera, and opera is a whole universe unto itself, in that it gives me access to directors, dramaturgs, set designers, costume designers, and that's a whole creative world that is very new and exciting for me. So I'm seeing a lot more theater. I'm like interacting with more people in the theater world. So I would say I'm involved in like so many different aspects of artistic creation. I'm just working with a friend who's doing an animation for a recent piece I wrote for 6 pianos. So I was at his studio yesterday, sort of looking at this animated piece. But it all does come out of the music. Like, music is my gateway drug into all these other artistic worlds. First, I would say thank you. I think the greatest, just on a personal level, the greatest joy of my life is working with musicians. And so whether it's people I never meet, but just maybe they send me an email or a video or a tweet, like, that is so nourishing to me. So I would say thank you for even looking at this piece. And I would say make it your own. You have my permission to bring your own personality into this music. Like, that to me is the point of collaboration. It's not for me to crack the whip and have you do what I say or do exactly what I wrote. There's a million different ways to play every measure in this piece. And I would challenge you, players of the future, to figure that out for yourself. Like, what can you bring from your own life and experience into this work? And I would love to hear the recording and be like, oh, I never thought about it that way, but that's an amazing way to play that chord or amazing way to play that melody. So bring it on.